Hey team, this is Grant David Collins and welcome to Basement Philanthropy, a place for people who do not want to wait until they are rich or retired to create meaning, impact, and connection with their time, talents, and money, regardless of the amount. On this episode, we're going to be exploring how your life is like the Truman Show, especially when it comes to giving. So let's get started. Have you ever wondered about or questioned your own reality? If you have, you're definitely not alone. Elon Musk has been quoted as saying that we're most likely in a simulation, and Neil deGrasse Tyson gives us better than 50-50 odds that the simulation hypothesis is correct. He's quoted as saying that I wish I could summon a strong argument against it, but I can find none. Now, that is a happy quote. Now, to be clear, I'm not personally a believer in the simulation hypothesis, but I do agree with both Elon and Neil on one thing, that our view of reality is not always accurate, especially when it comes to giving. So let me explain what I'm talking about. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone was looking at you? Many people experience this sensation, especially when they are in new situations. I know for me, that's when it shows up the most. But if you type in the spotlight effect into Google, you'll discover that such thoughts are mostly inaccurate, and that we tend to overinflate how much others are noticing us by a large margin. But focusing so much on ourselves, it is very easy to overlook those around us, especially those in need. Another example that highlights this tendency for us to distort our reality is the phenomenon of comparative bias. Now, we've talked about this before, but as a reminder, comparative bias is our natural tendency to base our standing in society off of our immediate surroundings. It's one of the reasons why many people in the United States feel like they don't have enough, even though they are likely among the richest people in the world by actual comparison. This unrealistic belief limits many people to give much less than they would have the capacity to do so. Now, these examples kind of remind me of the Truman Show. We talked a little bit about that in the opening intro. This movie was put out in the late 1990s, and in the show, the main character, Truman, lives a relatively simple life in the island town of Sea Haven. Until, of course, one day a microphone falls from the sky and Truman discovers that his life is completely manufactured, that everyone and everything surrounding him are actors or props in the reality TV show of his life. And thus, the Truman Effect was born. And similar to Truman, we can often not tell the difference between what's quote unquote real and what is just our own view of the world. And this really sabotages our efforts to make this world a better place. As humans, it seems like we're drawn to live our lives in protective bubbles, not really wanting to upset our delicate perceptions. We often erase or ignore the challenges surrounding us. While this approach to life seems to make it easier, it is not reality. 9.2% of the world's population, or 719 million people, live in poverty, meaning they live off of less than $2.15 a day. Currently, there are more than 100 million people who are considered refugees, being forcibly displaced from their homes as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, or other human rights violations. Over 6 million people in the United States are having serious thoughts of suicide right now. And as a side note, remember for yourself or those that you love that the suicide hotline number is 988. So please call that or refer somebody to that number if they fall into that 6 million number. And it's not just these big, huge, incomprehensible numbers that are occurring. In my community in Utah, 1 in every 10 people experience food insecurity, meaning that they have a consistent lack to access of nutritious food to live a healthy lifestyle. Now, I'm sorry to be a bit of a downer in this episode, but it's the hard truth that is actually happening all around us. And in a lot of ways, it's just the tip of the iceberg. And in my mind, the only thing worse than the challenges we are facing is the refusal to acknowledge that they even exist in the first place. Living our lives like the Truman Show does not change the inequity surrounding us, and it does not help those in need. But hey, look, I get it. Like, it's hard, and even our natural tendency to do this. So how do we start to see life a little bit more clearly and really begin to become the change and the care that we want to see in this world? Well, this podcast episode actually came from a conversation that I recently had with a friend who had just returned home from a humanitarian trip outside of the country. She was struggling, as most people do, when they run into these microphones falling from the sky, with squaring her experience around what her life was before she left and what it should be when she came home after this experience. And as my friend and I talked, we realized that there is a choice that is presented around these microphone moments. We can either ignore them or lean into them, continue to live lives of ignorance, or face the facts. And the crazy part about this choice is that even if we choose the second option, our very human natures tend to steer us back towards inaction. It seems like in order to truly lean into these moments, we have to actively put reminders in our lives of what is real and what is not. Because over time, these blips in our manufactured realities begin to seal up as if they didn't even exist in the first place. It's kind of like we need to all be a part of the movie Inception. Yes, another movie reference in this podcast, where the main character, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, has to spin atop every time he is questioning his reality to see if he is either awake or asleep. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of us walk around with tops to spin on the bathroom counter, but we can do things to check the reality that we are living in. Doing things to, in some ways, force ourselves outside of ourselves. And some examples of things that you could do is things like going to a food bank and volunteering at a local animal shelter. Asking someone how they're doing and then really taking the time to listen, or maybe just simply writing a list of things that you are grateful for. Getting outside of yourself, although a lot less cushy, creates space in your life for things like connection, meaning, and impact. So if you find yourself feeling a little bit disconnected from reality, it's probably because in some ways you are. Well, team, that's it for me. Let's see if we can wake ourselves up to the realities and the challenges around us so that we can create good in the world with our time, talents, and money together. You are so, so needed. Talk soon.